Demeo Vr, let's talk about it. So Demeo Vr is, first of all, a really confusing name because it could be said Demio or Demo, or like I say it, Demo. I personally prefer to say it Demo because, it sounds cooler than Demio or Demio or whatever else you want to call it. So I prefer to say it Demo. So to me, that's kind of a downside because I think video games should have, names that are like really obvious what they are so everyone knows what you're talking about instead of or games with names that are easily mispronounced or missaid and then other people have no idea what you're talking about, or where you can have several different people saying it in several different ways and then nobody really knows which game you're specifically talking about, or people could start fighting or arguing over how you actually say the name. So to me, it's really important to have a specific name that, and also a name that's super easy to tell how it's supposed to be said. Like Halo. Halo can't be said anything other than Halo. Call of Duty can't be said anything other than Call of Duty. All the other games I've played have only got one specific name with one specific way of pronouncing and spelling it. And that's just super, super, simple to me to pick a name that isn't complex and can't be said multiple different ways. Like, how hard is it to pick a game that has just one pronunciation for its name? Obviously not, since almost every video game in existence has only one way to say it. Anyways, so that's just my opinion. I prefer that games have one very easily pronounced name. That's all to me. So, anyways, Demo VR is a tabletop game, basically, a tabletop RPG, but it's in VR. Basically, all that you do while you're in the VR is you just see like a basement and a tabletop game in front of you, and you can use your controllers to move the tabletop around, to zoom in, to like slide back and forth across the table, things like that, and to move your pieces and select cards. So it's not like there's really much of a VR aspect to it at all. It's there, but there's not really much. The game is a multiplayer game, obviously. Well, I guess it's not obvious, but to me it would seem obvious if it's a tabletop game that is not meant for one person. Anyways, you can have up to 4 people. There's only a few different kinds of the game, though, where you can play solo player and survivalist. You can play multiplayer. You can have private matches, and you can have just regular public matches and lobbies. You can also host your own game. So there is some nice options there with all of that stuff. However, that being said, the single player survivalist mode really sucks in my opinion. Like, it's fun to some extent, but to me it feels like there's a lot more enemies when you're playing solo player than when you're playing public, and that makes it really hard. But just in general in this game, if you're a beginning player who doesn't have a lot of cards or anything like that, doesn't have a lot of coins, it's really hard to beat maps and clear dungeons, and that's really really irritating. Like, there should be like an easy mode or something for beginning players to be able to just go through and beat maps and be able to level up without having to trudge their way through all these crappy dungeons, dying all the time, not getting very far, not gaining much XP, and just taking forever to get to a high enough level where you can actually reasonably play the game. Now, overall, that's not too effective on the actual gameplay. It's just annoying. That's really about all it is. As far as the game itself goes, there's a few different styles of the game you can play, where you can well, not really styles, I guess, different bosses, different mobs you can go against. There's different like slimes. There's like the Spider King, the Rat King. I think there's the Snake King. There's a few different kinds of bosses like that. So it's different bosses, but the layers are relatively the same, but they're all still slightly different. So it's not like you're playing through the exact same dungeon every time. Plus, when you do play through, I believe there's 4 levels to each dungeon in order to actually beat the dungeon. So each of those dungeons will also have different maps, and the enemies get progressively more difficult with each dungeon that you get through. So in my experience, most beginning players have a hard enough time making it through the first dungeon, let alone the second dungeon. And in my experience, almost no beginning players make it to the third dungeon or further, obviously. So in my opinion, it's really kind of crappy because, You should have beginning players be able to get all the way through the game so that they can level up, so they can play and have fun. Because nobody wants to sit there and just die all the time. That's so aggravating and frustrating and annoying. Now, in my experience, along with that, most beginning players can't really get into public matches because most of the people who play this game are people from like D&D fan clubs and tabletop RPG fan clubs and stuff like that. So they don't really, not play the game. They spend a lot of time inside the game. They're really high level. And when you're that high level, you've got all the coins you can spend on better cards, and you've leveled up enough that you've unlocked certain things, and the game's a lot easier for you to play as a high level player. So they will kick low level players, or if they have a low level player in their match, they'll just blame them if the game gets lost instead of their own crappy tactics that made them lose. So in my opinion, there should be something that allows players to like hide what their level is, so that way they don't end up getting kicked out all the time from matches, because nobody wants to get kicked out. And if you can't get into a public match to play with other people, where's the fun in the game? So overall, I'd say that this game's a lot of fun. There is a lot to enjoy in it. There's lots of different options as far as the characters go. There's like 6 different options, from a paladin to an assassin to an archer to, just all that kind of stuff, like a mage. All the good stuff that you'd normally see in an RPG type thing. I think that as far as the options go for actual gameplay, though, you can only have 4 characters, which, while it doesn't seem too unreasonable, if you're going to have options for like 6 to 8 characters, it would be cool to see one where you can have that many characters. Now, I personally haven't created a custom match and set all the rules and parameters, but in my experience, you can only have 4 players. So overall, this game is a lot of fun to play from time to time, but it also, just like a tabletop RPG, takes a really long time to play through. In my experience, to do a quick run through of all 4 dungeons with people who know what they're doing, it can take like 4 or 5 hours to run through this. So that is quite a lot of time spent on it. And while that means there's a lot of content available in this game and a lot of different things available, the game is still priced at $40, which for a VR game is incredibly expensive. There's a lot of other better VR games with a lot more options, a lot more playability, a lot more content, a lot better graphics for significantly cheaper, like 15 to 20 bucks. So in that sense, I think the game is way overpriced for what it is. However, if you're looking at buying a tabletop RPG game, tabletop RPG games cost a lot of money. So for 40 bucks, it's really not that expensive for buying a tabletop RPG. But for a VR game, it is pretty expensive. So just be aware of that. It is a very high price point. I personally don't think it was worth the $40 I spent to get the game, just because of how limited things are and how much it sucks to be a low-level player and not be able to get anywhere in the game. However, all of that being said, I still personally love tabletop RPGs, so I have fun playing it from time to time. I just go in with the expectation of getting only through the first dungeon instead of 4 dungeon levels to beat the 1 dungeon. So, when my expectations are set right, then I can still have fun, play the game. And since I don't have a lot of people to really play the game with, I don't really jump into public matches anyway, so I mostly just play solo with myself, and it's still pretty fun. So I would still give the game a check if you wanted, but maybe watch some other people play it, get some gameplay viewed, and, just figure out if you actually want to buy this game before you actually go and drop 40 bucks on it. Because it is, like I said, one of the most pricey VR games that I've seen. Now, there are some out there that I've seen other creators like Markiplier and Laserbeam and some other people make videos on where they bought like $2,000 VR games. So I know at that point this game is really not that expensive. But for most of the games that I see on the VR stores, $40 is pretty expensive. Most games aren't more than like $30. Anyways, so overall, like I said, game's pretty good. I'd definitely give it a check if you're into tabletop RPGs. Beyond that, I wouldn't really recommend that most people check it out, just because it is very much a strict tabletop RPG thing. However, if you are looking to get into tabletop RPGs, it is also really fun to get into it that way. And if you're lucky, you might find some randoms on public lobbies who are willing to sit there and teach you tricks, tips, and strategies. Sorry about that. And they might actually be able to help you have fun and enjoy the game.